I am so excited because I'm going to be sharing a technique with you that is actually quite near and dear to my heart, because I have a lot of clients who love to be brunette, but they like to have some brightness and some pop to their color. So we are going to be talking about creating a sparkling blonde, okay? And for those who are not familiar with the trend of blonde, essentially it is a brunette that has some blonde features like highlights, brightness, pops of color that are very blended naturally into the natural base. So I hope y'all are excited, because I am excited. This is literally my love language. I love creating beautiful, deep, rich brunettes that still have some vibrancy, some lightness and brightness to them. So today's class is going to be a ton of fun. There we go. All right, we had lost connection for just a second. All right, guys, so we're going to jump right on in and we're going to get started. As you guys can see, I already have half of my mannequin done, and she has that very beautiful bright blonde look that we are going for in today's class. If you guys would look and see how reflective and how beautiful this tone is, you're going to absolutely love the toner formula that I'm going to share with you, specifically because you're going to still be able to get brightness and vibrancy while controlling a lot of that warmth that typically lands at your natural level 7s, 8s, and 9s. So I'm excited for today's class. Are you guys excited? Check her out. Look at this face framing highlight, guys. Some people like to call it a money piece, but essentially it is a highlight that frames the face of the hair, or the face. So look, check that out, y'all. I'm going to actually show you guys how to achieve that beautiful, heavy face frame without it looking too chunky, without it looking too, what's the word I'm going for? Without it looking too solid and stripy. We are looking for a very beautiful natural blend. And so we are going to create that nice reflective blonde technique. As you guys can already see, her hair, look at that. You can still see some of those very subtle highlights in there through the hair with a nice bright face framing highlight, okay? So I am super excited for today, all right? Yes, somebody said foliage that gal. Yes, we're going to be working with some foils today, and I'm going to show you guys how I like to create that face framing highlight, how I like to do a very subtle blended in highlight, and how we're going to tone the hair to create, again, that beautiful blonde that is lived in. It's natural. It's not super dark, but we're not going to take or get rid of all of your blonde. You want a nice, beautiful blend, okay? So let's start out, of course. And one more thing I want to show you guys. If you guys look at where the hair started, notice how brassy and almost orange that hair looks in comparison to this more subtle cool tone. So something that I wanted to talk about with you guys, especially when you are going and taking some of your blondes slightly deeper in tone, I want to talk about cooling it down without making it look super dark, okay? So again, what we're going to be doing is we are going to start off with prepping and protecting the hair. We are going to, of course, utilize our Defy Damage Pro Series 1, which is going to help you to protect the bonds of the hair before you actually go in to apply your lightener to the hair, because we are going to be working with Blonde Life lightener today. Usually I like to work with Blonde Life cream lightener, but I'm actually going to work with the powder lightener today, simply because we're going to be doing highlights in foils, and you guys are going to get to see how I actually tone the hair and what toner I like to use for this specific color. So first things first, of course, like I said, you want to make sure that you're prepping and protecting the hair. Get your Defy Damage Pro Series 1, which is a bond strengthening, bond optimizing spray. So it is an aerosol spray, and as you guys can see, I literally went in and started spraying onto the hair as soon as, literally before I even start working. Mainly because I am looking to create a nice clean canvas for my lightener to go straight onto without having to worry about if the hair is going to be fragile, if it's going to be damaged, if it's going to actually give me a nice clean canvas to work on. I like to prep the hair and protect the bonds of the hair with my Defy Damage Pro Series 1 before I even start my lightener process. Now, if you guys have ever taken a class with me before, you may know one of my signatures is to normally start off with a lower volume developer. Today, we are going to be utilizing on the mannequin, I'm going to be using 20 volume developer. However, the actual formula calls for 10 volume developer. So if you are utilizing this look or doing this look on somebody's natural hair, 10 volume developer is going to be your go-to. If you need to elevate your developer as you are working through the head, you can go for your 20 volume, which is 100% fine. What I like to do is in my sections, as I'm going through, I start off with my lowest volume developer, and I will go in and follow up as I work through the head with a higher volume developer. So I'm literally just going through the process of using a lower volume to start, and then I work my way up to a higher volume developer, like 10, 20, typically 20 is my max. And in today's application, because we're going to be utilizing foils, you guys will actually see how quickly I'm going to work through the head, even with this particular technique, okay? So again, we're going to start off with prepping the hair. You are going to utilize your Blonde Life powder lightener and 10 volume developer. And as you guys can see, it's a blue-based powder lightener. So with this particular lightener, we are going to get a great mixing ratio if we are mixing 1 to 2. So 1 scoop of lightener for every 2 ounces of developer is going to be the best mixing ratio to get you a good consistency, okay? And just so you guys can see, when I am mixing, I like to use my brush, and I will mix right with my brush instead of a whisk. The reason why is because I don't want to put too much air or too much oxygen into my mixture while I am working. I like to make sure that I get a very smooth, creamy consistency where there is not too much whipping or aeration of that lightener. So I like to work with it and keep my lightener nice and smooth as I am mixing, okay? There's nothing against working with the whisk. It's a preference for me, and I notice that I never have to worry about swelling of my lightener. I don't have to worry about my lightener moving or processing too fast. I like to get a good creamy consistency. And so that mixing ratio of 1 to 2, 1 scoop of lightener to 2 ounces of developer is the perfect mixing ratio for you to be able to get a good creamy consistency, okay? And also, when you are mixing with a 1 to 2 ratio, you don't have to worry about the hair lifting too quickly. You're going to get a perfect 9+ level lift that's not too fast and not too slow. It's going to move perfectly at a nice consistent speed, and it's going to be thick enough that if you decide that you want to do open air painting, you absolutely can. But if not, you can still put this in a foil and you're going to be able to get a nice, consistent, good saturation, okay? So the next thing that I'm going to do, again, I like to make sure that I am working in clean sections, but I also like to keep everything nice, neat, and organic. So I typically will work with quadrant sectioning instead of working with, there we go. I like to work with quadrant sectioning. And so the reason why is because I like to work off of diagonals. It is a great way for me to be able to get diffusion and softness and a nice blend as I'm doing foiling. But one thing that I will typically do as I am working, especially with this particular technique, I will take my first section and I will leave this section out so that it is a halo over my highlights. I don't want to put too many highlights in here because we are going with a deeper tone. I want to make sure that I am getting a nice, beautiful consistency, okay? I want to get a nice, consistent highlight, nothing too crazy, and I like to go through my sections fairly quickly because, again, I'm working with a lightener, so I don't want to move too slow. I want to make sure that as I am working through my sections, I'm moving quickly. So even now, as you guys can see, my first section, I'm just going to do a nice consistent weave. And I'm going to I'm utilizing an angled brush. And so somebody mentioned a little bit earlier doing a foliage. We are doing a similar application of a foliage because I'm going to work on angles. I'm not necessarily looking to get a super blunt application. I want to get a nice angle going because what I'm doing is setting myself up for success as I move my way forward to that face framing highlight. So I'm taking my brush and I have it angled up. And I'm going to continue to work in those same angles. Because again, I am looking to get softness. I'm looking to get a blend. I don't want it to be too stark of a harsh line. I want everything to look nice, natural, and blended, okay? Now, if you have a client who is coming in and they're already blonde, that's actually a great thing because you won't have to go in to highlight their hair. All you'll be doing is shifting their tone with a demi-permanent color, which we'll talk about once we finish our first quadrant. But I like to actually go through and I like to prep the hair with some highlights, especially if I have somebody who has naturally dark hair. Even if their starting level is not super dark, say for instance, they are starting at a level 5. A great rule of thumb is if they are under a level 7, naturally, you want to go in and just do a small bit of highlighting so that you can make sure that you get a nice pop of lightness as you are blending in that natural base, okay? So I typically will go in to do some very mild highlighting as I am working through the hair, okay? Especially if I have somebody who is starting off at a dark natural level. So again, I am working off of the points of that quadrant. So I am going down and I'm literally starting from the very top and working my way down utilizing diagonal sections. Nothing too spectacular about that because you guys are probably super familiar with doing that. However, what I want you to recognize is as we are working through the head, you want to give yourself a nice smooth canvas to work off of. Again, my weaves are not super small and they're not super big. They're just regular size weaves, and I am still utilizing that same angled painting. So as you can see, before I started just heavily applying my lightener, I angled my brush. So I'm taking the point of my angle brush and I'm starting at the very top of that section, and then I flip. As I'm going to the next side, I'm flipping my brush, so I'm pointing the angled point down. And I'm going in and I'm creating peaks and valleys as if I was doing a traditional foliage application. So yes, we are doing foliage style highlights, okay? And the great thing about doing it this way, again, is that it's going to guarantee you a really beautiful blend. So you're not going to have extremely harsh highlights. And also, the hair is going to grow out really soft and beautiful. Instead of having to retouch this consistently, because this is a low maintenance style, this is a very low maintenance color. And so instead of having to retouch it consistently, if you are to do a more foliage style application, that's going to give you much better longevity instead of having to constantly retouch. It's going to grow out beautifully without your client feeling like, oh my goodness, I have to come back in and get a retouch on my roots in about 6 to 12 weeks. So This is a very natural and lived in look, and it's very low maintenance for those who are looking for a low maintenance style. So we're still working in diagonals, but as I get closer and closer to the front of the hairline, I'm going to make my sections a little closer together, number one. And I'm also going to start to do more heavy highlighting toward the front or towards the middle of the part. And now if you have someone who does not wear their part in the middle, meaning they're like a side part type of person, or they prefer to switch their part, you can do the exact same technique. But what I would suggest is to either work off of where they prefer to part their hair, or you can do a mohawk style application. And so I like to do a mohawk style application when I have clients who are not quite committed to a certain part. So if they are the type of person that likes to change their part quite frequently, I will do a mohawk style application, meaning I will work off of a mohawk section in the middle, and then the rest of my quadrants will be diagonals. The reason why is because it helps to soften up wherever you're going to work off of, meaning this mid section is going to be where the bulk of your highlighting is, but that means that if they part their hair on either side or in the middle, it's not necessarily going to look stripy. And again, I still like to make sure that I'm mindful of the way that I am applying. I love to do a more blended and more natural look. So I prefer to opt for feathered brushes, as far as the bristles being feathered, or I will opt for angled brushes. Can you do the exact same thing with the regular brush? Sure. But is it going to make it easier for you if you already have a brush that is feathered and angled? Absolutely. So work smarter and not harder, okay? And again, you guys can see literally as I am working through my sections, I'm just changing the direction of my brush. I'm not even really having to work super hard as far as creating that nice slope or that peak. I don't have to work really hard doing that because my brush does it automatically since it's an angled brush. All I'm doing is changing the direction of my brush, and as I am working, I am still doing a very gentle application. Same way you would do as if you were doing a balayage with painting on the surface of the hair. You're going to turn your brush and it is going to be parallel with the hair. So that will give you a softer application. And you're just, as you get up to the edge of your foil or the top of your foil, you're just going to go a little softer with your application. You want it to still be heavy, but you just want to go a little softer with how you apply your lightener. And one thing you guys will see me do very much when I am working at the very beginning of where my line of demarcation would be, I like to feather up instead of feathering down. The reason why is when you feather down, you're pulling product or lightener off of your section, which is typically going to create that orange band that you see because there's not enough product at that section. So I like to take my brush, once I have everything blended out, I take my brush and I feather up. So that way I can make sure that there's still really good saturation at the very edge of my foil. Haley said you usually use the cream lightener. Do you prefer it for any reason? I need to play with it more myself. Great question, Haley. So I like to utilize the Joico Blonde Life cream lightener on the scalp, especially when I am doing very high lift colors like platinums, platinum cards, or platinum pixies, where there's going to be lightener on the scalp. I will typically opt for my Blonde Life cream lightener because it has natural oils inside of it, which help to keep the scalp hydrated and keep it from getting irritated during the lightener process. So that's typically where I will prefer to, yes, somebody said, can I angle my camera downwards? Just make sure you guys can see. There we go. I like to utilize my Blonde Life cream lightener in those instances versus utilizing the powder lightener in those instances. Now, that does not mean that your powder lightener cannot perform on the scalp. It absolutely can, no problem. But I noticed that when I utilize the cream lightener on the scalp versus my powder lightener, I have less scalp irritation. Another time where I like to use my cream lightener over my powder lightener is when I am dealing with naturally curly hair. So when I'm dealing with naturally curly hair, because typically their hair can tend to be a little bit more dry and those curls can be a little more fragile, I like to opt for a cream lightener over my powder because, again, I want to make sure that I am locking in and keeping in as much hydration as I possibly can. So great question. So guys, as you can see, I'm still working in those diagonal sections. My last section, I did a small weave. I'm still working on weaves, but remember, I'm getting close to the front of that hairline. And because I want to mimic the exact same or a very similar money piece on this side or face framing highlight on this side, I'm still working off of the same type of sectioning, but again, I am looking to get a little heavier as I'm getting towards the front of the hairline. So I'm still working with my regular highlights, but all I am doing is I am going in, and now here, as you guys can see, let me place this foil. This weave right here is just a little bit wider than the rest of them, because all I'm doing is I am creating more brightness around the front of the face than I am everywhere else. So I'm just getting more and more heaviness, more lightness and brightness around the front of the face where I'm looking for it. So here I'm going to do another. You see how I'm just taking my brush, I'm feathering up. And again, I'm working with my angled brush. So I'm taking my brush when I need to go and create a peak on the opposite side. I take the brush and I rotate it. Once I get it blended out, I take my brush and I brush upward. Same thing on the opposite side. You can literally flick your wrist and rotate up. And all you are doing is making sure to get that good saturation, okay? So as I am working closer and closer to the front of the hairline, I'm trying to get as much saturation as I can around the front of the hairline or around that face framing highlight where that would typically be. I noticed today a lot of people prefer to just section it out and lighten it that way. But what I noticed, really quick guys, if you see, because I have a little bit of a peak on these sides and I have a valley here, I'm going to, instead of folding my foil completely up, because I don't want to have any of this lightener touch this section, I'm just going to fold the very bottom of my foil here, and then I'm going to fold here. So that way I can still get a good consistent lift and I don't have to worry about my foil and my lightener transitioning anywhere where I don't want it. But again, as I'm getting closer to the front of the hairline, some people will typically just take the section and lighten that. But instead of doing that, I'm going to show you guys a trick to get you the same amount of heaviness without having to literally just do a scalp to ends section of lightener. Nothing against that technique. It's beautiful when it's done correctly. However, when you do it that way, the grow out is not as natural. And not only that, when that person decides that they want to transition to a more natural and lived in look, because most people do, they love color blocking for temporary. But when they are ready to do a more blended look, it's more work for you. So instead of going through and working hard in that way, let's work smart. So what I'm going to do, my first foil, so we are working and we're getting right up on that front hairline. So these next 3 foils are going to be back to back, but I'm going to show you a trick. So you don't create a super harsh line or what we like to call a skunk stripe. I'm going to show you guys how I like to do this. So my first foil is going to be a very fine highlight or a baby light. We're going to take this foil, and as I am working, I like to work when I get to the front of the face frame, instead of doing my foil going forward, just for the sake of comfort of my client, I will do this foil going backwards. And so I will literally have my client tilt their head slightly back so I can make sure that everything is back away from the face. I'm going to do this foil backwards. And when people see me do this, it cracks me up because they're so surprised by it. But you literally are keeping tension on the foil by pulling this hair back onto the foil. So it's a great way for you to be able to keep tension on your foil section, but also be able to work where you're comforting or it's comfortable for your client. So I like to make sure that I am still prioritizing my client's comfort. And so again, I'm still working with my brush angled, and I am going to go right up to the edge of the foil. So I'm still creating that same angle, but I'm literally working smarter because my brush is working for me, okay? So I am going to go and I'm going to work and blend that section up. So I'm still working on an angle, just not quite as hard. And I'm going to blend this up. And the great thing about doing it this way, again, is it's comfortable for your client. Nobody likes to have foils sitting on their face. Honestly, it's quite like, it creates a little bit of claustrophobia. Yeah, we're used to it, but if we can do something that is a little more comfortable for our clients, let's just do that. Also, it helps you to have better posture, and it's easier on your hands and wrists. So I will, again, fold that first foil, and I'm going to come down. Now I'm going to take my next slice. Remember I said these are going to be back to back. So now my next section is going to be right behind the last section. I'm going to now bring this foil, or bring the beginning part of this a little closer to the front hairline. Still working on an angle. So I'm bringing that blend down just a little bit more. And you guys may have seen, if you've ever taken a class with me, you've seen me do this before, just slightly different. All we are doing is we are slowly bringing our highlighted section closer and closer to the root. And what that does, if you do that with 3 back-to-back foils or even 4 back-to-back foils, essentially what you are doing is you're creating a more natural and more soft gradient. So it will give you a much better blend out of that natural face framing highlight, but also on the mid to ends, it gives you the heaviness. It gives you that chunky look without it being literally just scalp to ends, one stripe of lightener. Does that make sense? So it's going to give you the exact same effect, but it's going to look much more natural. And once I finish these foils, you guys will actually see on the opposite side how that face framing highlight looks. You'll still see the exact same fullness and thickness of what looks like a stripe of blonde without it literally being a scalp to ends stripe of blonde. It looks much more natural and it grows out much better. All right. Now we are down to our last section, and this section is going to be the closest to the root that you're going to do, okay? Still a thin enough section to read through, so you're going to get great saturation, but it's going to give you that brightness around the front of the face. And so what I like to do on this last foil, I try to get my foil as close as I possibly can to the root. And what I'm going to do is, before I even allow this to sit down into that foil, I have it slightly elevated because I want to make sure that I can get under there and get good saturation. As you can see, I'm still away from the scalp, so I'm not completely to the scalp, but I'm going to get really close. The best way to do this is to saturate heavy, about 1/4 of an inch away from the scalp, and then you are going to brush backwards. And that is going to give you, remember I said, that's going to give you that softness. So that what you're able to still get that beautiful heaviness without having that hard line of demarcation, okay? So as you guys can see, it's still beautifully heavy on the front of that hairline, but we're softening that line of demarcation. This is where very subtle, very little things that you do to prioritize, number one, the health of your client's hair, but also giving them a nice, beautiful blended out look instead of taking shortcuts that will kind of give you the same look, but the grow out is not going to be as soft, as natural, or as beautiful. Doing these very small things will 100% set you apart as a colorist, but also give you, when it's time, a much easier time when it comes to retouching and growing this color out. If they decide to transition to another color, another tone, it's still going to look beautiful. So I want you guys to think about ways that you can incorporate very simple things like this, very small, easy techniques like this that will help you to be able to get a much better grow out, a much more natural blend for yourself and for your client. So again, once you are finished, I like to go back and double check, make sure everything is blended out beautifully. And this last foil, you can fold down to the scalp. And honestly, I like to leave it just as it is. I don't even mess too much with this last foil because I want this to be saturated well and to process very well also. The most that I will do is I will close up those sides. And I want to show you guys one more trick before we move into toning. As you guys can see, this foil is rounded. I do not push or crease this foil on the end. I rarely do that with any of my foils. The reason why is because when you do that, you will push product off of the hair and create a line of demarcation where there probably was none. You probably had great saturation at that point, but when you crease your foil in that way, you push product off that was there. So I like to, instead of creasing the foil, I like to keep it rounded. So that way I can make sure that the saturation stays there at that point inside of my foil and everything is going to process exactly how I want it to. And now remember I said I was going to show you guys how this looks on the opposite side, just so you guys can get a visual. As you can see, look at the very edge of her hairline. You can't even really see where that money piece actually starts at the root because it's blended out so naturally. However, as you get down into the lengths of the hair, you have that heaviness. So it creates a very soft, almost slight point. And then it comes down into that full heaviness because we did those foils back to back and getting that full saturation from mid to ends, but creating that gradient throughout the root. It gives you the brightness, the fullness of a money piece without you having to literally do a stripe section, okay? Yes, Kelly said, great tip. Thanks. Haley said, love it. Okay, good. I'm glad that you guys are enjoying so far. So that is literally with our lightener section. this is what we're going to do. We're literally working off of a quadrant. We're going to take diagonal sections back to back. So we're going to take, of course, sections of 1/4 of an inch, slice, weave all the way down until you get up to your face framing highlighted section. You're going to do 3 back-to-back foils, and those foils are going to get gradually closer and closer to the root until you get to the very last foil, and that one will be the closest to the root. It's going to give you that soft, natural money piece or face framing highlight with the nice density that you were looking for without having to create a stripe. It's going to give you a beautiful blended look that will still look beautiful, still look natural. And once you apply your toner, you will get a beautiful blend. Now, let's talk about our toner, okay? So just to share with you guys what we're going to be using. Some of you, I think, have already seen because they posted in the comment section our toner formula. If that can be posted one more time just so everyone can see what we're going to be working with. Because I want you guys, again, to look down really quick. Look at the difference between these two sections. As you can see, yes, this will be saved. How far down the hair shaft did you start the first foil? The first foil is going to be about 1 inch away from the hair shaft, just to give you guys like numbers. First foil is going to be about 1 inch away from the hair shaft. Second foil is going to be about 1/2 inch. And then the last foil is going to be about 1/4, a little less than 1/4 of an inch to the root. So that's if you were doing those 3 back-to-back foils in front of the hairline. Those 3 foils will literally be, you just kind of go slightly closer, and then the closest will be your very last foil. So just to give you like a rule of thumb, inch, 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, closest. That's kind of the best way to remember. Great question. But yes, guys, if you look, take a look at these tones. You guys, I'm sure, can see how orange and how brassy this section looks. So this section has already been slightly pre-lightened. You can see from some of those ribbons of highlight that's in there. Again, we are looking for a very natural blend of highlight. So we're not looking to get any drastic blend of highlighting. We want something that's very natural, very subtle, that in the event that this person wants to transition to something else, they absolutely can, but it still looks natural, still looks beautiful, and gives you the vibrancy and reflection of a blonde. But we're going to tone her as a brunette. So because we are doing that, when you are dealing in brunette levels like 7, 6, 8, typically the underlying pigment at those levels is orange, red orange, yellow. Typically, those are going to be the tones that you are living at. And when most people who are brunettes say, I don't want to see red or I don't want to see orange, this is what they're talking about. And so just take a look at that. It's very orange, very brassy in comparison to here. That's much more natural brown. It's still bright and reflective. So we are going to utilize a formula that's going to help you to cool off that brassiness at that level 6, 7, but still give you a nice reflective shine. So we are going to be utilizing Lumishine Liquid Demis with 5 volume developer. So these are demi colors only. They're deposit of tone only. They're not going to lift. They're just going to shift the tone of the hair. And so actually, I'm going to leave this here so you guys can see because it's a definite difference. So yes, we are going to be utilizing, our first formula is going to be 7BV Blue Violet. That is the perfect toner for you to still have vibrancy to the hair, meaning it's not going to be a super matte brown. It's actually going to still have some reflection and shine through it because we're not completely mudding out the hair. We are just trying to cool off some of that warmth to a beautiful natural. So your 7BV Blue Violet is going to be our first formula, and that is going to be mixed with 5 volume developer. Again, guys, I am a big advocate for making sure that I am doing whatever I can to keep the hair as healthy as possible. So with that being the case, I like to work smarter, number one, but I also love to work with products that are going to help to keep the integrity of the hair. As you guys noticed, this is our Blonde Life 5 volume. So this one is specifically created for our Blonde Life gloss toners, which are better for blonde hair because typically blonde hair can be a little more dry. It can be a little more dull, a little more fragile. So this developer actually is a coconut oil developer. So it actually has coconut oil in it, which of course helps to give you that shine, that vibrancy, that hydration to typically more blonde, dull, dry hair. But I like to use it on some of my regular demis as well because it's a 5 volume. So I'm going to be utilizing this today. And again, with this, because it's a deposit only, your mixing ratio is going to be 1:1. So 1 ounce for every 1 ounce of your demi-permanent color, you're going to have 1 ounce of developer. Normally, when I am working with this, because it's a liquid, and you guys can see here, because it's a liquid, it's actually quite movable. So I just want to show you guys as I mix what this actually looks like when it's mixed up. So I am a big fan of our liquid demis, mainly because they give you a lot of shine, number one. They give you that beautiful hydration, and they also are deposit only and pH balanced. So when I am working with these, I normally am able to get a really good consistency to be able to apply to any type, texture, and density of hair. But I also am 100% confident in the fact that their hair is going to feel better, it's going to look better, and it's going to be 10 times more shiny after the fact. Now, because we're going to be working on our back section, and if you guys look, it's a nice consistency. It's not too liquidy. It's not too creamy. It's just right. It's almost like a very loose jelly. And so I like to utilize these when I am lightening, or I'm sorry, not lightening, after pre-lightening, because again, it's the pigment of tone. So I like to opt for a liquid demi on pre-lightened hair, especially when I'm doing reds, brunettes, things like that. I love to go for a liquid demi because they just give you so much shine. Now, our second formula is going to be 8 in and a drizzle. And when I say a drizzle, I literally mean like a very small pour, very quick pour of 7 BV and 9 BV. It's going to give you a very similar effect of an 8, a very cool natural 8. And where I'm going to use this, and this is going to actually be applied after this section is finished lightening. This is going to be applied to our money piece or our face framing highlight. The reason why is because, again, this section is lighter. I want this color to pop against the rest of the depth. So in order for this to look vibrant and bright, we want to go with a slightly lighter formula, not too deep, not too dark. You want something that's still going to be perfectly balanced, which is why I opted for that 8 in as my base. And then I added just a bit of 9 BV blue violet and 7 BV. Again, it's going to give you just a drizzle of coolness to that natural 8, where it will still have warmth and shine to it, but it's going to be cool. Deborah said, would this be a nice toner for brunette for her gray? Great question, Deborah. If you are not familiar, we also have a permanent gray coverage line called Lumi 10, and in Lumi 10 there is actually some blue ash colors. So it's NBA natural blue ash, and essentially it's a natural brown base with a blue base tone. So it will give you that very rich, cool brunette. So if you have somebody with gray, that would be what I would suggest. Our demi liquids are great for covering gray in some instances, but they're not going to give you 100% gray coverage. Because they are quite sheer in their tonal deposit, they're not going to give you a solid gray coverage. So if you are looking for more of a solid gray coverage, I would opt for a permanent tone, or even in some instances a cream demi. But if they are okay with having a gray blend, you could possibly use this particular formula for that. So that was a really good question. So guys, do you have any other questions? I'm going to get ready to apply this demi color to our back section, which has already been pre-lightened. And essentially, we are going to cool off this very warm tone in the back section, because I want to create a very natural and beautiful blend. So I am looking to cool this off, blend my highlights in, still have some reflection without it going super duper dark. So I will be getting ready to tone this back section with my liquid demi, but let's do a quick recap before we close out for the day on what we did and what we focused on. Our goal was to create a blonde hair color, a blonde tone. And so essentially we went in to pre-lighten with our Blonde Life powder lightener and 10 volume. On the mannequin we use 20, but on a regular client you can 100% use 10 volume. If you need to elevate your developer to create the lift consistent throughout the head, meaning if you start in the back and you work your way to the front and you need to elevate your developer, that's okay. Start with 10, your next batch of lightener, mix with 20. So that way you get a good consistent lift. Second thing is going to be our face framing highlight, how to create that beautiful blend. You guys watch me do 3 back-to-back slices. So those last 3 foils were all back-to-back. They got slightly closer to the scalp with each foil. Just a little pro tip. You can do first foil 1 inch away from the hairline or 1 inch away from the scalp. Second foil, a half an inch away from the scalp. Third foil, you're going to do closest to the scalp. So that would be either 1/4 of an inch or right off of that root. That is the best way to be able to get a beautiful blended face frame without having that chunky highlights. Okay? Nothing against the color block. However, if your client is looking for more of a natural blend, that technique is going to give you just that. Last but not least, we worked off of diagonal slices. So we did diagonal slices all the way down to our face framing highlight. All of our slices were about 1/4 of an inch thick. And we went through, did some weaves, weaved out the hair. We're leaving hair out in between because we're going to leave that natural base. When we tone, we are going to be utilizing our Lumishine Liquid Demi with 5 volume developer. Formula 1 is going to be your 7BV Blue Violet, and that is going to be applied from the section of the face framing highlight that's going to be applied from their back. The face framing highlight will have its own formula. That will be 8 in your Lumishine Liquid Demi with a drizzle. And when I say a drizzle, I literally mean like a drop of 7BV and 9BV. That is going to add just a touch of coolness to that natural level 8. We want that face framing highlight to be toned separately because it's going to give you the vibrancy that you need and keep that lightness around the front of the face. Our first formula is going to be applied from right where we started our face framing highlight on back. So we're just going to blend in all of those other highlights that we put in the hair so that we can create a nice, cool, naturally blended base. And you can see the difference just for how these two look sitting right next to each other. You can see the difference. Look at how cool and beautiful that is in comparison to this section. So I just want you guys to be able to see what that would look like on the hair pre-lightened, what the hair looked like before we pre-lightened, and what our final result is going to be.